Okay, yes, we are. Sweet.
All right.
Well, let me actually save this link in a couple places while the live link is active, and then we'll get started. Not really too big onto making this too professional because that's just too much work. Well, in the meantime, now all of a sudden I can't find the link.
I should turn my key light down a little bit more.
Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. So
there we go. Now I'm not so overexposed.
all right, it's actually posted in the event now, so if it doesn't actually link properly, at least people can find it in the discussion.
Yo. Oh, hi, Adam.
Oh, hey, there's Adam. All right, so I'm actually going to do an introduction this time because I didn't do an introduction last time.
Oh, boy.
So, welcome everyone to the second episode of what I'm calling Costume Conversations. I kind of started this thing as an excuse to just talk to people about stuff that I love and kind of hope that other people enjoy the conversation too. But today we're going to chat with Blair and Griffin about kind of what goes into the analysis process of making a screen accurate costume. I know both of you guys have worked on various projects over the years, and I've been following a lot of the things that you've done. So it's exciting to actually have you both in the same place and talk about, you know, cool, nerdy costume stuff. So why don't we just dive into it? Blair, why don't you introduce yourself real quick and just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Blair. I have been doing costuming since 2016. So kind of started out in the Star Wars land of all things. So some Han Solo. Kind of got into it as an escape from my day job and found sewing to be very meditative, and through there got obsessed with the details, into kind of now transitioning into my current build that you'll see parts and bits of it behind me, as Isaac from the Orville, taking it in a whole different direction with new fun techniques. So it's definitely been a fun adventure and journey.
Awesome. And go ahead, Griffin.
Hi, I'm Griffin. I've been doing costume work since 2011, maybe earlier, a little earlier, but not really till 2011. And I've worked actually semi-professionally and professionally in costume work for here and there, but mostly personal stuff, cosplay, things like that. I started actually, I think, with comic book reproductions, things like making real things in comics. I think Batman was the first one I did. And after that, I did get into Star Wars around the time the new movies came out. Loved Star Wars well before those came out, but there was something about those new costumes, particularly Kylo Ren, that I had to make it real and make it something I could touch. I have been working on a lot of stuff since we've all been locked inside. And I do some bespoke builds like what's behind me, but I also do a lot of reproduction based off of sourcing and lookalikes, things like that. I do costumes, I do props, some hard pieces as well. So.
Awesome. So, I mean, you kind of touched a little bit on this already, so I might not make it a specific costume, but maybe, or a question, but maybe, what got you guys into costuming in the first place? Like, what was the moment where you're like, oh, hey, this is actually really cool? You can start with Blair again.
Yeah, mine was, like I mentioned, I was just, been working at my job. I'm a software engineer by day, and I was staring at computer screens for so long, and a Halloween costume contest came up at work, and a group of us just got together and were like, hey, let's throw together some closet costumes, and we formed the the Harrison Ford. So we all did Harrison Ford costumes and made like a fake like movie poster for it. And I got Solo, and so like I just kind of pulled out a pair of jeans. I used ribbon to make like the blood stripes on it. I tore apart an old jacket to make the vest, and I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. And then I slowly was like, this is neat. And some friends introduced me to other friends that were doing kind of the cosplay and the costuming, and then it went down a whole other road of getting into the details. It was just something for me was I like replication. Like when I do art, I find like I kind of like to like not copy people's work, but I like to try to take something like it's a concept art or something and bringing it to life. There's something that for me is very enjoyable about that process. And so and just kind of figuring out how to make things is also kind of why I got into programming in the first place. I have to build a program, and there's all sorts of different ways, with some right and some wrong, but sometimes you can just do what you think is best. And that whole logical process is something that I enjoy, and I found something equivalent, but in the physical world instead of zeros and ones in costuming.
No, that's awesome. What about you, Griffin?
So, I was a little different actually. Definitely, Halloween was my favorite thing as a kid. But for me, it was I less about the costumes and more about the characters. I always liked playing pretend as a kid. That was one of my favorite things. I played sports too, but I really liked pretending to be this, pretending to be that. Whatever character from whatever TV or movie show. And as I grew up, it didn't really go away as I got into performing and acting. And cosplay has actually been such a great expression of that need to perform that I've had. I haven't been in a place in my life where I've had a chance to do a lot of plays or film. I've done some, and I'd love to do more, but right now it's real hard. But cosplay is this kind of pure one-on-one thing that you can do with a very broad audience, all improvisation typically. And the costumes are such a big part of that, because the costume brings out the character. It sells the character. So when I really got into it in the early 2010s, it was more about making myself feel more like the character by looking like the character. And I must have some form of OCD, because that turned into, well, it's got to look just like it did in the movie. It's got to look just like it did in the TV show. I even started out with like Batman and stuff. In the comic books, they don't draw seam lines. So I did everything I could to make my costumes as seamless as possible, which, is kind of impossible with some things, unless you paint it onto you. But it was a weird obsession that was there from the start. And boy, has it absorbed so much of my life since.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we all can agree that when you put on Han Solo's belt, you just start walking like Han Solo. So I think I can relate to that statement a lot.
Oh yeah.
I always tell anyone, get a metal gun, because that really have that actual weight. Not a real gun for all those people talking fake, but it's still metal. But that having that weight really adds to the way that you walk, and you kind of really start to feel. Yeah, that's my favorite thing. I actually was talking to a friend about it the other day.
It's funny, yeah. And then you just start smirking anyway, because you feel so happy that you're in this costume that you end up looking like Han Solo. So, I mean, I guess that kind of segues into the next question. Was just like, did you always strive for screen accuracy in your costumes, or was it something that just kind of happened later?
What?
I would say that mine was like in the beginning, I had no idea what screen accuracy was. And then I just kind of fell into it. I got introduced to it, and I just became obsessed with the details. And I will now like fret, like I'll go in later about Isaac, but some of the stuff that I've gone through to try to get this stuff as close to screen accurate with things that I can't get, that's my obsession. So yeah, it's overcome me, but that's what's fun to me. That's the part of the hobby that I eat up.
Yeah.
It never started with the term screen accuracy. I think I'm with Blair at this. I hadn't heard that term before. I don't think I was part of a community that or any of the communities that we are now, where that's just such a thing we talk about a lot. I think it just came from, like I was saying before, that sort of kind of bit of obsession to, if it doesn't look like it did, it bugs me, and I got that little itch, that I had to just look right, and it plummeted downhill. And, I blame high definition and 4K.
Right.
Because now we can see every little detail, every little seam, every strange shape. And I feel personally that there's no excuse for me, if I can do something just like it was, to not do it just like it was, so.
Funny enough, it was one of the reasons why I didn't do costuming earlier in life, was because I would have been too obsessed with the details, and I didn't understand that I was able to do it. So for the longest time, I just assumed I couldn't do it that way, so I didn't see the point. And it wasn't until later that I finally figured out that, maybe this is actually possible. And the first quasi screen accurate costume I made was Stargate. And it was only quasi screen accurate because I didn't fully know how to look for all the details. But as I mentioned on the last stream here too, I had to hand sew the entire harness for the P90, which is all webbing, because I didn't have a sewing machine. So that was, yeah.
That's it's a funny thing. I think maybe all of our builds, unless we're extremely lucky, will probably end up being quasi.
Well, yes,
something identical to what's on the screen is really near impossible. I mean, getting as close as you can is maybe the goal for some people. But I think the most important thing is feeling good about it, wherever you're at, whatever level you do, and that that might be someone who makes their own, someone who purchases it from someone else, someone who sources and puts together parts, lookalikes, exact replicas, high end, low end, middle end. As long as you are happy with what you're putting on yourself, and it makes you feel the way you want to feel, and fulfills that part of you that is why you're motivated to do it. I think that's all that really matters, and it's to each their own. I think there's a lot of stuff thrown around about, some side will belittle lesser detailed things, and other side will belittle, the term, what was it? Gosh, Blair, what's that term they throw around a lot? Can't think of it when it's like a pretentiousness that they say that
elitist.
Yes, that elitist.
Yes.
Elitist is thrown around a lot. I feel like elitist is an attitude, not something you do. You can have very accurate things, and you can put a lot of work into it. You can be very proud of those things, and not be elitist. Elitist is an attitude. It's not an activity. It's not. Adam says canon. Yes, canon. Or canon. Right. Actually, that's an interesting thing that we might want to get into later, but I don't want to get into too much. Is screen versus canon. Like what actually was it versus what was it intended to be? And there's a big sort of discussion there.
But I definitely have a question about that later too, so we can totally dive into that. Unless you want to talk about it now. I mean, this stream
Well, I do want to throw one more thing in here, but I think we were kind of chatting prior to this about the screen accuracy as well, is that, we also are looking at, things that were used in film that might not have had to be worn all that much, and they could stop between takes and stitch somebody in and do things where we're actually having to make things that are going to endure 8 to 12 hours of wear, depending, and different, climates and all that fun. So in a way, sometimes what was done on screen just isn't necessarily feasible for somebody at a con all day. And then you also go along the line of the screen accurate if there's just things you can't get. And kind of actually talking about the elitist thing, you even kind of find that outside of the cosplay and the costuming community, even from people. I've had people that have worked on the actual costumes tell me the way that I'm doing something is a cosplay technique, and it's like, well, that's great. I'm trying to reproduce something that you had made by a company, and I don't have the liberty to do so. So, for me, I have to kind of figure out a way to get something that looks like that. But doing it in a different way. And at the end of the day, there really isn't a right or wrong way. So it depends on how you want to define screen accurate. And I think everybody has a different, point of view on that. I think, Griffin, you brought it up too. As long as you're happy, whatever your definition is, and that makes you happy, you should not be building things for anybody else. You should be building it for yourself at the end of the day. And so what your level is and what you enjoy, that's what you should stick with.
I like that term, cosplay technique. We should adopt that as a non-derogatory, because that's great. Cosplay techniques, because those are the techniques you use. That's basically taking the thing that, oh, you made this and it would last for one shot. We made it last for 12 hours. So I don't see that as a bad thing.
I'm using Sharpie and fabric paint, but at first I fooled the person on this because they were like, "Where'd you get that fabric?" I was like, "Oh, I made it."
One shot. We made it last for 12 hours. So I don't see that as a bad thing.
I'm using Sharpie and fabric.
You have the stream up?
At first I fooled the person on this because they were like, "Where'd you get that fabric?"
Oh, there we go. I was getting some feedback audio.
I think Facebook was looping back on itself somewhere, and it's okay.
Fun.
I don't know how. I have it muted, but it's fine. It's gone. It's not there anymore.
It's funny because we're here for costumes, but both me and Blair work professionally in IT, so we're just like, yeah, computers, they do that.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah, all three of us. That's funny. A completely different conversation that I don't want to have because it's a Sunday.
That's fine.
That's for Monday.
Tomorrow, right?
Well, you guys kind of both answered one question that I was going to ask you too, which what you consider to be the most important part of creating a screen accurate costume, and I think you nailed it on the head already. It's what makes you feel good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, yeah. So let's talk about the analysis a little bit, because I know that's kind of one thing that I'm very curious about, because I'd like to see other people's methods for tackling this. But like, what do you tackle first when you start examining a costume that you've never seen before, or that maybe, let's just assume that nobody else has really done a lot of work into this yet? What do you look at first?
Man, reference. That's the first battle, finding reference. Trying to find as many angles, as many pictures, highest resolution as you can. You have to actually have something to inspect to do an analysis, and that when you're working with a pop culture thing, like movie and TV costumes, boy, that's rough. And the guys I feel for really are actually the people who will replicate from Broadway, because there sometimes will be nothing. You'll have a couple of promotional stills, and that's it.
Right.
We're actually pretty spoiled doing film and television, but those guys, it's rough. But yeah, I'd say reference is the first step, because if you don't have adequate reference, trying to replicate something accurately is off the table.
Yeah. Did you have anything else to add to that, Blair, or is that pretty much?
I mean, yeah, it's the art of the hunt. I mean, for me, like I think the Isaac costume, I didn't really even think about attempting it. And that's a fun thing too, is you got to remember when we're talking film and even TV, costumes will change season to season. So technically I'm doing season 2 of Isaac because I felt it was more achievable with the techniques that I would use versus that. And but I felt like I could attempt this costume because I was in 2019, I went to San Diego Comic-Con, and they had the Orville experience, and they had the costumes set up in person. So I'm like, picture, super high res. And when you can get those moments, like those are some of the best for any cosplayer or costumer, when you can actually be like inches from that costume and seeing how they made it. And that's also helpful when it kind of helps speed up the process, but there were still like back shots I couldn't get. So like there's hours where I'm just like watching, the Orville, and I'm like, pause, screenshot, but then I just go down rabbit holes again. It's how much you also just want to research. Sometimes some people will just work off of one, front image and then just imagine the rest, So, but yeah, it's a lot of research.
D23 2019, that was the one for me because I had all the Marvel costumes, in that one little aisle. That one was great. They had it, and they didn't have them behind glass. Like they only had behind glass on like the first day, and then they're like, but no one could really see them. So we could see all the way around them. You could see them with no glass, no glare. You could get crazy up close pictures. You could get back shots if you just stuck your hand around and took a picture with your phone. And some of them were on a thing that was in the middle aisle, and you could see the front and the back. Those display moments, those are ideal. I think all of us can attest to when the Solo Han costume went on display for the first time. I actually got to see it at a FITM in downtown LA, and I was this close to it, and I was able to reconcile some debates, at least in my own head, that were still raging, and that was well after the film had come out. People are still arguing about this or that.
How many messages did I send to you? I'm like, oh, did you see that? Can I get this?
I think a lot, yeah.
Let's talk about the suede.
Oh yeah.
Shoulder suede debate color. That was fun.
Oh yeah. I can tell you it's black. Hey, it's black. It's not blue.
I think people black. There is not really a true black in dye colors.
No, and that's the thing. I saw one that was on display, and the one thing that is like Blair was saying, things change from season to season on a TV show. Things change from scene to scene in a film. The reason is everything that's made for a production they make multiple. There are probably 15 of those jackets. I saw one of them.
Right.
So really, like, if it looked a certain way in a certain scene, and that's the way you want to make yours look, there's nothing wrong with it. And a lot of these debates are kind of baseless. Like, there's no point to argue. You could both be right. I think one of the ones for the Solo one was actually the blood stripes on the pants. Some were saying, well, are they tan or are they red? The answer is both. They were red, and then they had tan weathering. They were added, I think, for the Savarine scenes. That was supposed to be like sand, right? That had gotten on the pants and really stuck to the stripes. But they'd overdone it, so the stripes were like almost completely tan on that pair, or one or two pairs that were from the Savarine scenes. But then in other scenes, they were red with maybe some black, like oil stains or some other sort of grime on them. Everything is done differently, and that's especially when you're dealing with something like Star Wars, where they try to make things look lived in. They're doing weathering. Weathering is never consistent. They never wear the same thing twice. It'll be close enough for what they're filming, but when you actually see them in person, or when you're trying to compare them, garment to garment, no one of those maybe 15 jackets is going to look identical. And when you're dealing with something like a leather garment, you're not dealing with one hide of leather like you might be dealing with everything from the same bolt of cloth, right? So the dye might be slightly different. So maybe those shoulders were black on 1, 2, or 5 jackets. The other amount were more of a dark blue because the dye used for the suede was a blue-based black, because there's no true black dye. So things like that. You gotta choose your battles. Choose them wisely.
Lighting. Let's talk about lighting as well.
The Imperial officer uniform, everybody, which apparently is 5 different colors at any given time.
Yeah.
I remember watching one scene in A New Hope years later, after I'd really started paying attention to costumes. And I remember one scene where in the sort of briefing room, when you have one of the officers walking across the room, and he goes from a dark to a light spot, and you can see the color shift of the uniform. And that, to me, just tells me that it is whatever color it is. And if you want it to be slightly greener, if you want it to be slightly grayer, if you want it to be slightly browner, and it spawned an entire belief that these uniforms were all different based on the branch of the Imperial military that you were in. And even games that
I love that.
Even
I
games
love canon excuses for on-set discrepancies.
Right.
What might have actually just been a simple thing, like it could have been a mistake, or it could have been, it could have been not a mistake, but just nothing they could really avoid. And you see those discrepancies in the code cylinders on the Imperial officer. These officers have this many, but the rank has this many. The reality is just there was only ever one officer on screen of that rank, and they just happen to have that many. and then the other officer had that. It might be because they were low on the props or that didn't matter. There might not have been any real thought like that when they were filming, but we go and we look, and then, you know, you've got these companies like Lucasfilm, and they have their story groups, and they have their expanded media, they have their follow-up films 30, 40 years later now, and you are getting retroactive continuity adjustments and that canon explanation for those on-set discrepancies, because in 1977 they did not care at all. They didn't think the movie was even going to be successful. And so here we are in 2021. We're finding a reason for it, and Lucasfilm is great about that. They have people whose job it is to explain those things, you know, and I love that they do, because it's such a great zone for us to be like, okay, there we go. Or what was it? Was it Filoni who had the thing about, well, is it AT-AT or AT-AT and all those different ways of things?
Mandalorian.
It's regional. It's regional like a dialect, and different people say it different ways. And he specifically, in the new media he created, would have different characters say it different ways, and it was so. It's all canon, and however you choose to say it is correct, and you know, bringing in that concept of like regional dialects to the Star Wars galaxy is fun, because we have those on one planet here. Imagine, you know, these thousands of planets in the Star Wars galaxy. Of course, they're going to have, you know, people are going to say things differently, you know.
Okay, so I'm kind of bouncing around through these questions because I don't want to ruin conversations, because that's more fun anyway. But I guess once you've got the research down, you kind of looked at stuff. At what point do you sit there and say, okay, that's good enough? Like, where is it where you're just kind of like, I'm driving myself crazy, I need to stop, or there's still one more piece of information I need?
I think it varies. You know, I think I get to the point where I have enough of a general idea or understanding of the costume that I can start sourcing specific pieces. So for me, I'm going to start sourcing the parts that I think are going to be the hardest to acquire, because sometimes certain things, even as creative as you can get, might make or break you. So like for me, for the Isaac build, it was this fabric. It was this dot pattern that I had to do on this fabric. If I couldn't get something that looked like that, for me, I couldn't do this costume. Like, so it's kind of like, then I kind of start going in and taking certain parts of it and doing experiments. So this was searching for fabric, finding the fabric, doing experiments, multiple experiments, until I got to a point that I was happy. And so it's kind of like, you know, you can start doing research, you have enough, but you just kind of like I start piecing it together. I start piecemealing it together, and then I kind of go from there. But always start with the hardest first, the biggest hurdle, and then I kind of feel like I can coast along.
That's very smart. I wish I did that more. I've learned to kind of do that more recently, try to do the thing that I think is going to be the biggest pain, because once you get over that bump, then everything is downhill from there. I think for me personally, I actually will want to source things very quickly. I've actually made that mistake, and I'm trying to actually get away with it. I'm trying to get to the point of doing a little more analysis before sourcing, because the worst thing is when I buy enough fabric to make an entire project and then find a higher res photo of the screen use fabric, and it's completely different, and it's just the biggest, most agonizing thing. So trying to stay away from that has been a learning experience, but definitely sourcing, whether it's fabrics or parts or whatever. But there's a funny step that I do, which is deciding, well, am I going to make this or am I not going to make this? You know, have to make this, you know. I do a lot of bespoke builds, you know. My Han builds are all bespoke. My Luke behind me is bespoke, you know, 100% made by me. The only parts that aren't made by me is maybe like the wig and a glove, you know. But there are a lot of things that I do that I think is kind of it's something that's not only cosplay, it's something they actually will do in industry, and that is deciding, well, how much of this do we have to make from the ground up, or what can we source, what can we modify? You know, a lot of the blasters in Star Wars are real guns that are kit bashed and made into a Star Wars blaster. So I follow a lot of that same ideology of like, what do I have to make and what can I not make? That might be because I'm lazy, but still, I think it's a good methodology to go through. And that'll come even before I do my deep dive analysis and start looking at everything. But then after that, it's identifying fabrics and materials, because if you can't get fabrics and materials for something, then you have to find a good alternative or give up. But I don't really give up a lot because I'm stubborn. So
I feel you there. Yeah.
You know, I have to make a point about being lazy. And someone once said to me that he only ever hires lazy people because they will always find the easiest way to do things.
Interesting perspective.
I mean, to a degree, if we're all in IT, we can talk about the best programmers or lazy programmers, right? Because we always try to figure out like the most efficient way to do something. But that can backfire on you for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely some, it's not a perfect statement by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't know. It reminded me of that.
Yeah. I have a slightly different perspective on it. It's just, put in your front end work, so that you're back in bed. I mean, I'm in a coordination for my department, so it'll be develop a really good system so that these guys can just follow it and do less. If I do more at the beginning, then the follow through at the end, and that actually circles back to like what Blair was saying about start with your biggest hurdle. I think it all falls under the same ideology. Go with the most difficult thing first. Do the most work front ways when you have your most energy, your most drive, your most motivation. So whatever it is, that's just kind of that's a good way to do a lot of things. I can't say I always follow that. Sometimes I think the build behind me is a good example. I'll do the thing that I enjoy doing the most first sometimes, just to kind of get myself excited, and I'll do something quick and easy. For me, it was the belt rig on Luke, because I like leather work. I actually enjoy it. It's not something that stresses me out the same way fabric does. And boy, does fabric stress me out.
Oh, I feel you there too.
So I put together. I crafted the buckle out of sheet aluminum, and I cut the strip of leather. I dyed it. I did all the punching and attached all the bits and stuff and sourced all that. And that was a fun process for me. And once I had that, I was like, well, this is a physical piece of this costume. Well, now I have to make the rest of it. So there was no turning back at that point. So I think it depends on the project. It depends on how you work. But yeah, either go with the hardest thing first so you can get that out of the way, or start with something that's going to really get you going, get that motivation, and make you want to finish, But definitely don't leave the hardest thing for last, because that's the worst. That's when you end up with like what Alex likes to refer to as UFOs. I forget what it stood for, but basically a big box of unfinished objects. Unfinished objects were they're no fun. They're no fun because then you're not wearing it, you're not using it, and you put in a bunch of work and it's not done, and you don't want to do it. Actually, when I was a kid, I played a lot of video games, and one thing I would always say is never stop on a frustrating part, because you'll never go back and finish the game. So I kind of feel the same way about my cosplay project. If I'm doing something that's so irritating, keep going and get through it. Maybe take a short break, take a breath, keep yourself calm so you don't mess up, but try to work your way through it, because you don't want to put something aside and then not want to come back to it, because when you're thinking of, I want to go back to that project. Oh, but the last time I worked on that, I'm so mad, because no one likes being angry, I don't think. I know.
I'm not a fan of it. I've often found for me, because I have definitely got ADHD, and I have the biggest hyper focus thing that I could possibly imagine, where I will get stuck on something until there's a slight problem, and then I'm instantly done with it and I have to do something else. And I literally have between 10 and 20 projects constantly going, because if I don't have something else available for me to do, then I will just I'll end up with that issue where I don't finish anything. So when I do get to that situation, I'm kind of like, oh, well, this is really frustrating me right now, but I know how I can do this other one. So I'm just constantly ping-ponging back and forth between these different projects. And
that's smart.
I've learned that's just my brain works, and that has become my
and you know, I've heard the same, and I to mention Alex, she does the same thing, and I think a lot of makers, you know, find that a good way to work. If you get frustrated with something, or if something is, you're just not feeling it, whatever the situation, you know, having something else you can do so you're still productive is great. I don't do that as often. I'm a little more obsessive than that, and that if there's something I just want to get done, that's the thing I'm going to work on. But there have been projects that I've had crossover and simultaneously been working on, and I've done that before as well. And I would even say, even though that's not my general way of working, that is a way that I have done in the past. So I can tell you, even from someone who doesn't generally work that way, it still works. So to each their own, absolutely. And whatever helps keep you going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way too. I also use my costumes now for learning purposes because I want to learn a lot of new techniques. So my current set of projects are very much overly ambitious to the point where I'm learning how to sculpt, I'm learning how to mold, I'm learning how to 3D model. But for me, the thing that I love is to learn. So if I have a costume that's always using the same technique, so for a while there, I was really all into soft parts, but I got to the point where I'm like, I can do this good enough. It's the same thing. So I was getting bored with it. So I'm like, all right, let me pick, you know, costumes that have multiple different techniques. But because of the learning curves, you know, any learning curve, I think for anybody can be frustrating at times. So I needed to pick costumes and multiple costumes that had things that were easily obtainable, or a skill that I already had, or something that might be tedious, aka these dots on this Isaac pattern and all the quilting, you know. And then I would flip around, like, do I want to learn something? Do I want to do, you know? And so like having that variation of things definitely helps keep you motivated versus like something just becoming like, I have to do this to get it done, but I'm so bored with doing this thing. So I think for me, I always recommend, if someone can do it, have, you know, at least 2 projects going. So if you do kind of hit a rut, you still can have something else to work on.
Or a multimedia project like that. That's a good point, because you might only have one project going, but it might have a lot of aspects to it. You know, you might be like, oh, I'm sewing a shirt today. That's irritating, and I don't really want to do that. Oh, but I have to go paint this prop piece for the same costume. You know, that's definitely a place that I've been, and I like that. That's a very good way of doing things.
I think making a Mandalorian costume has probably been one of the things that I have been able to keep in the family, as it were, of the same costume that I'm working on, because I'm constantly like, oh, well, I can do the flight suit now. But that's frustrating. I'll work on the flak vest. Oh, let's figure out these boots. Oh, I know. Let's figure out the whole leather harness and all of this. And so I think I feel you there.
Man, yeah, Mandos are the ultimate multimedia project, I think, you know, because there's fabric, leather, hard costume bits, props, cobbling, even if you want to make your own boots and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I would love to be able to make boots, but I don't think that's going to be something I'm ever going to dive into. I want to do everything, and that's a problem.
I feel you there.
Excuse me 1 second, guys. My dog is barking. I'm not sure why. I think she might need to go. It can be 2 seconds.
No worries.
Yep.
Well, I mean, okay. So I'll ask it again when he gets back. But for you, what do you find to be your favorite part of the whole process then? Like, what is it that really kind of makes you keep doing this?
I think it's as like, I start with piles of fabric. I start with all of these found objects, and when it starts to take shape and it starts to emerge, like what I had in my head is now actually in front of me, and so like that, it's seeing that come to life. It's also kind of doing some of the more challenging you know, techniques. Like with Isaac, when I started this build, I didn't know how to sculpt. I didn't know how to 3D model. And so some of the techniques I started with, I was like, I'm not going to learn those skills. But the direction I was going with, I wasn't happy. So I'm like, screw it. I'm going to learn how to 3D model. I'm going to learn how to sculpt. And then actually doing it and coming out with a product. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I actually did this with the technique from like a year ago when I didn't know how to do it to now here I'm at. So watching my own personal journey is also like, And like I'll tend to post stuff on Facebook or Instagram, and going back and seeing these memories with the direction I was going in to where I'm at now, like it's just a fun personal growth exercise for me at the end of the day as well. And it just makes me really excited. It's like it kind of gives you that little boost of like, oh, I did that, you know.
I definitely, I feel that too. One of the biggest things that happened for me is that the first time I was able to actually do and make something that I've been wanting to do since I was like in 3rd grade was kind of like, it felt like a huge milestone in my life. And that I don't know, I think for me, I've really enjoyed the whole aspect of figuring it all out. I guess is but yeah, so Griffin, I was just asking what it was the like your favorite part of the process. What is it that you really enjoy doing?
That's hard for me. And you can ask people who have seen me work, and they'll tell you he doesn't seem to like any part of the process. I have a love-hate relationship with almost all of it. Finding reference can be enthralling when you find what you're looking for, and very irritating when you can't seem to find what you're looking for. Doing analysis can be fun and very fulfilling when you can figure something out, and extremely frustrating when you can't. Sourcing materials is probably my #1 most hated thing, I think, because sometimes it's extraordinarily hard. Sometimes things just don't exist, and you're trying to find the best look-alike as you can. And then crafting, actually making a thing. It depends on what it is, I suppose. Patterning is either very fun and could be easy, could be difficult, could be the worst thing I've ever done, and I want to smash my head against a wall. And then actually cutting things out, sewing it, tailoring it. It's a whole process. And I gotta say, I don't know if there's any part that for me sticks out as a part I really enjoy or really hate or any of that. I think maybe when it works out, which isn't always, which is frustrating, but when it works out, the first time I have a completed piece and I can look at it and be like, I made that, or I assembled that, I put that together, and it looks really the way I want it, which is all too rare for me, unfortunately, due to my just obsessive nature. But when I have that piece that it's exactly the way I want, that's the part of the process I like, because when everything kind of comes together, you get that culmination. You're just like, there it is, And that might be a cheap answer, like when I'm done, But I think that's the truth for me. I'm not in love with any part of the process. I just do it because I like the result.
Yeah, no, I see that. Well, I mean, you kind of answered what would be like your least favorite part of the process too. But
I'm long-winded. Sorry.
Yeah, the answer to that question is yes, it is all of it. Best and worst part of everything. But what about you, Blair? What would you say is your least favorite part of the process?
Fabric hunting. I hate looking for fabric, and specifically for fabric during all of the pandemic. I like touching fabric. I like to go shopping and going to stores, and most of the larger stores, like here in Chicago, we have a few different like larger warehouse things, and just with that stuff. So it's shopping online, and half of these places do not have good swatches. So perfect example. Like, I don't know if you guys can see my pile of all of my fabrics. So
make your screen bigger. Hang on.
Oh, no, I can't. I can hold up like the pile of fabric that I have
That's
here.
perfect.
Yeah.
Let's talk about fabric shopping online here for a second. So this fabric I thought was gonna be right based on the picture, and it would have been if they would have sent me the right fabric. What I was looking for, actually, I got lucky on this stuff here.
Oh yeah.
This was what I was looking for the shoulder of Isaac here. I thought this was a totally different fabric. I saw it on eBay. I'm like, why not? I'll buy it. It came. I was like, wait, this is totally for this other part. And I ended up only with a few yards of it, which should be enough. But I'm like, I still want more of it, because my worst fear is I mess something up and I run out of the fabric that I spent weeks trying to find. I thought I found it online at a place in the UK, and I looked at it, up close. and they keep sending me this fabric, and it's totally nowhere near. It's got this whatever pattern. And I told them, like, you sent me the wrong fabric. I'm like, and screenshot side to side. I'm like, you can see the way it is. And then they sent it to me again wrong and finally refunded me the money. And I said, well, so then I tried again with another place. They had terrible pictures, totally not right. But at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff I'll end up making other garments with. But I hate looking for fabric. It is it's a nightmare. And it just stuff doesn't translate well. Like I found another one that looked like this was like, I think through on Etsy. It was close, but the pleating wasn't quite right, but it didn't translate well. So like trying to find some of these very specific fabrics. Plus I'm like, what do I even Google to find this fabric? I don't even know. Was it pleated? Was it quilted? How do I describe that it's silver, but it's actually made up of little tiny, geometric dots? Anyway, that's what I hate the most of when it comes to that is fabric hunting for very specific fabrics, and the Googled search terms get really interesting.
That's a skill in and of its own is searching. And I think that's something that I've been proud to say that I've gotten much better at is finding things, being that, the internet detective, because especially now when there's such less that you can go do in person and go find in person, it's very important to be able to find stuff. Luckily, a lot of places will have swatches, mood fabric, stuff like that. But not every place. And like I was saying, if you get something from eBay or Etsy, they don't always do a swatch. They're going to want to send you whatever they've got, and you don't know what you're going to be able to get. And you don't want to order your full run. So maybe you order a yard, but that's still like maybe a little more money than you want to spend on something that could be completely wrong. It's just, I hate online fabric shopping. It's an agonizing process when you're forced to do it. Here in LA, the downtown fabric district was completely shuttered for several months, and luckily it's mostly back open now. We can get some stuff. In fact, the week it opened up is when I got all the fabrics for Luke. Like one day I went. Made trips.
Yeah, I have made trips specifically out to LA just to hit the fabric district. Yeah. I'm like, I'm playing because it's worth it. It really is. It's worth going in because you cannot find a better collection of fabric anywhere else. Like statement of fact. So if you can do it, go to LA and go to the fabric district if you've never been, because it's awesome. We have a few warehouses here, but it's nothing of what when my first experience of LA fabric was like, oh my God, places like this exist. So yeah.
Oh, you know what? Adam mentioned something in the comments too that I have to say because it's perfect. He's like, also when you find fabric that you want, but the minimum order quantity is 200 yards.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Something like that. It may not be a full 200 yards, but it's like a full bolt of like 20 to 30 yards. That happens a lot because a lot of places you'll find online are commercial wholesalers. Now if it's for a popular enough costume, you can get a group together of people who all want fabric. And I think, early on in the Kylo process, Luke Daly was having the Kylo fabric custom milled. And so he would do runs through, I think, the RPF originally, where he would have people commit to X amount of yardage, and set amount of yardage would then, he'd tally it all up until he had the minimum order, which I think was like 30 yards or no, I think it was more than that. I don't remember. You'd have to ask Luke, but it was a lot for them to custom mill it. And, that's part of the process too. And it's something you do, but like, if you're doing something obscure or something like from something old that no one else is doing, that's when it gets really interesting, because you're trying to find maybe a really specific fabric for something that no one else cares about. And the only place you can find is from a place that's a wholesaler. And you're just like, I think the other one that really bugs me is when I find a really obscure fabric that's like so perfect, but it's completely the wrong color. But it's got the texture, it's got the weave, it's got whatever you need on it. You can buy whatever amount, but it's completely wrong. I actually just found something that's a production made basket weave with a metallic coating that looks like just like what they might have used for Kylo in The Force Awakens, and it's baby blue. And that's the only color they have is baby blue. And I was like thinking, well, I could do an Easter special Kylo Ren, but aside from that, this isn't gonna work. So it's not a super fun process sourcing stuff. And that goes for fabrics, but it also goes, I think, for a lot of parts. If for prop builders out there, they can tell you finding vintage Greeblies is rough. Sometimes, if you're dealing with like the Graflex, lightsaber from Star Wars, everything's identified. Some things might be rarer than others or more expensive than others, but there's tons of replicas. But when you're dealing with something that no one else really is working on, or you and 5 people maybe care about, it's rough to try to find things,
Also, if something doesn't exist anymore as well, like with even if it's well known, like the original series Klingons, like Star Trek Klingon vest that they had, which had that really crazy like gold and black stitching pattern. That was it had like a pattern that went from like single line black and gold to like double and 3 and then back and forth down the front. And you never see that in the show because it's really hard to see those details. But someone got like a real close-up shot of it, and it was made from some dress fabric that was put out in the 60s, and it doesn't exist anymore. I've tried looking for that.
Those ones are really hard, especially something like I know people do a lot of I've talked to some people who do like Batman 66, that show, and that stuff's hard enough, and that was a very high-profile show. The first season of Star Trek, it was just like the first Star Wars movie. No one really knew what was going to be or if it was going to be successful. It was kind of low budget. They found a lot of stuff, and we're dealing with stuff that far back. You're never going to find it again,
Nope.
Things that just don't exist anymore, So that's when you get into the realm of lookalikes, close enoughs. What can you do? And that's why the whole screen accurate thing is not always an achievable goal. Sometimes you get to the point where it's just good enough.
Well, and you know what? Let's talk about something else too, because this is always one thing that, especially lately, as I've been piecing together. I just got done sourcing and making my Indiana Jones costume, and
yes. No, that one.
I love that costume a lot, and the fact that it's so different across all the movies, and you can. There's so many different things about that costume, but it's a same production as Star Wars for the most part, so they had their methods down. But what you get, I guess the question is more, you have screen accuracy, and then you have the idealized version of whatever it is you're trying to make, right? And like I think it was Blair, you'd mentioned earlier about when you're making a costume that needs to be worn, especially when we do events with groups where we're wearing this costume like 5, 10, 15 times a year. You know what I mean? To you guys, what do you like? Do you prefer the idealized version, or you prefer it to look like it did when you're staring at it on screen with every single detail and flaw and whatever you want to call?
I mean, I think it's a compromise. I think it depends. So like one of my other costumes I'm currently working on now is a C-3PO because I'm crazy like that. And so for me, that costume is a total compromise because there's that costume alone, just by how it's made, is uncomfortable, period, uncomfortable. But there's modifications that I have to make to that costume that are going to make it slightly inaccurate. Why? Because I'm not a skinny twig like Anthony Daniels, and I have hips. So,
yes.
How do I make this thing fit? How do I, I have to change some of the proportions. So like I'm tinier up here, but I have to make the shorts a little bigger. But by making the shorts bigger, I start throwing off proportions. So there's things that I've kind of introduced to taper. Actually, Gordon Tarplay mentioned this because actually they did it in the sequels with Anthony just being older as he is, making the torso more comfortable. I think they did flare it out at the bottom a bit. So instead of being completely straight, it flared. So kind of in this case is kind of taking some things that they've actually probably have done in the movies, but it's not necessarily for the same version that I'm making. But it's that compromise. I first off want to be able to wear this thing for at least an hour or two at a time. So there's some liberties that I'm making to make that costume comfortable. But unless like you're a total C-3PO fan, you're not going to probably notice the modifications that I'm making. Because to me, it's like, can I trick the eyes? You don't even notice that I made these changes at the end of the day, right? So again, I can compromise with where I want to go. But for me, at the end of the day, comfort it does play a big role of where I'm okay making this not screen accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a line you have to draw between wearability and screen accuracy, and it is blurry. It is a very blurry, wide line. It's a spectrum. And it's up to the individual, and typically the individual wearer. So if you're making something for someone else, that's the person who should decide. If someone's making something for you, you should express how you feel about it to your maker. So that's very important to make sure that when you put this thing on, you're not gonna be like, yeah, I love how it looks, but this is awful. I can't wear it. And I've kind of changed a little bit. In recent history, I used to be very strict to screen accuracy, and I was actually at the point where I was like, well, I wanted to look how it looked on set. And there's another debate, which is how it looked on set to how it looked on camera,
right?
Because we're usually doing things where we're being seen in person. So should we make a costume to look the way that it looked on camera for the people who are seeing us in person, or should we make something look the way it looked on set, so then if you take a photo or a video of us, we'll then in that photo or video look the way it looked in the film? And it's blurry. Some things some way, some things the other, and there's no correct answer. Some people will argue that point and say that one way is the correct answer, and the other way is the correct answer, and people butt heads about that. But in my opinion, there is no correct answer. It is what you personally prefer. And those compromises of accuracy when it comes to wearability, when it comes to practicality, deciding whether you want that on camera, that on set appearance, that's completely at your discretion. But I've actually come more to the camp of idealized, because like I said, kind of towards the beginning here, a big part of my motivation was expressing myself as the character. From a performance standpoint is where I was originally drawn, and where I still find myself. A big part of what I do with creating and wearing costumes is the performance side of it. And when you're performing, you want to feel like the character. And, you could have a rubber blaster in your hip, but like Blair said, if you've got the metal one, you're going to walk right. And you're going to feel that way. It's going to make you feel more like the character. You could have a super accurate, skin tight garment that looks just like it did on the film, but you're going to not be able maybe to breathe or move, and you won't feel like that character if you can't breathe or move. And then, so taking liberties of accuracy for the sake of idealizing something to make it, look the way it should. And like you said earlier, they've done that in the films. Compare in the original trilogy of Star Wars, Darth Vader in A New Hope to Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back, and it's night and day. They cared more. They knew more people are going to see this. They had, more availability, higher budget, better tools, whatever the situation. The original Darth Vader helmet is asymmetrical. It's got a thumbprint in the sculpt. But you don't have that in The Empire Strikes Back. They've made it symmetrical. They've fixed some of it. The paint is a little more luminescent and metallic, and it looks just cleaner and better. It is more idealized, and that's just one movie to the next. And if you're only working on the one you're doing it for cosplay, I don't see a problem with that. In fact, I encourage people to use their creativity to make something that maybe is more of what it should be in reality. I like that, and I love to see what people do with their creativity of this idealized, how should this look? Yeah, it's not the most accurate, but it makes more sense. And I love to see that, and I'm leaning that way with a lot of things lately. I still do screen accurate stuff when I can, but I like to wear my costumes, so I want to feel like this is a functional thing.
I did a lot of that with when I put together the Captain Antilles jacket which arguably is really, without the helmet and the pants, is just a rebel jacket, because like tons of them wear this thing. But I looked at it a lot, and I sat there and I decided that, this is the Star Wars equivalent of a BDU, like a battle dress uniform that just military would wear on a regular basis. So I went and I took the philosophy of how those were put together, and I found a sporting fabric that closely matched what it looked like on screen, and then I added the faux suede to the shoulder pads. But I decided that I was going to make it as though like these are the rebels. They don't have a ton of money to throw at these like ridiculously expensive like combat gear. This is not a lined jacket. This is totally not lined at all. There's that they would BDUs are not lined. So that's kind of where I went with that. And I don't really know for sure if they were lined for the movie either. I never bothered to check because I just decided I wasn't going to care. But I like how it came out, and it looks great. So
they'll add linings to things in films to make them crisp and clean, but in reality, it might be a garment that, you wouldn't wear a nice lined jacket into combat,
right.
And you're not going to be super concerned with, everything being nicely pressed, You save that for your Class A's, your BDUs. No, you're going to fight. You're going to fight for your life sometimes. You're going to fight for other people's lives. And if you think about that character, that story aspect to the costume, then it gives it a different life, And I love that creativity and that thinking. And I think we're seeing that more and more in modern costume design for films, as you're seeing things that are a lot more practical. Just look at the way they dress women now compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago. Before 20, 30, 40 years ago, they dressed women in the most ridiculous things. What woman's going into combat wearing stilettos? No one. So, they're still putting them in wedges these days, but at least it's a little better than stilettos, and that's mostly to keep them height-wise in camera. But yeah, I love that thinking that you're making something as it should have been, as it would have been if this were a real thing for this real person to wear in this real situation. I definitely like that thought. And that way you're not putting a bunch of hidden Velcro everywhere to make up for the discrepancy of how truly ridiculous the garment is.
I have a philosophy. I don't use Velcro anymore unless I have to. And it's dumb. It's just my own personal opinion, because Velcro is great. It's awesome. It's useful for so many things. And I'm like, no, I don't want to use it. I want to make buttons. I want to make clasps. I want to make something that's like solid and I don't know, feels more quality to me when I'm wearing it and using it. And it doesn't matter to anybody else because they cannot see the difference.
Yeah, that's right. And I can tell you in the vein of that, the ones that I do a lot are the Captain America costumes. I think I've done now 5 of those costumes. There's nothing practical about that. No one's fighting evildoers in those costumes, man. Like, they're luckily made out of stretched fabrics, but aside from that, like, why do you need a screen printed fabric that catches the light beautifully? Why would you need that? Why doesn't your harness have a chest strap if it's got to hold the weight of your shield, on your back? Why is there no zipper closure in the front so you could put it on yourself? Why is it 3 or 4 layers of nonsense? And then it's funny, the design, there was a little bit of like utility put into the design, but in the reality, the costume is so non-utilitarian, so non-practical, and I would love them in just one of those movies to put some of these Marvel people in some of the superheroes in something that makes sense, because they're all these crazy costumes they couldn't even get into on their own, The only one that makes kind of sense is Iron Man, because a robot puts it on him or it forms around his body. That's about it. Everyone else is like, oh, hey, can you zip me up? I gotta go fight a bad guy. It makes no sense.
Yeah, that's true. It's so funny. I'm just imagining before they go into battle, they're all having to dress each other just so that they can look their best.
You gotta look great fighting all the evildoers in the
world. Oh yeah,
world.
absolutely. Hang on.
Is my belt lined up? I didn't put any belt loops on this. Is my belt lined up?
Hang on, let me safety pin that for you. Oh man. Well,
Crime fighting or fashion show, you decide.
Right. Well, we're sitting at about an hour, and I have learned that I don't want to go on forever because, hour's a pretty good amount of time. So, is there anything that you guys would have wanted me to ask you that I didn't?
I could keep talking for hours on this subject. Let's put it that way. This is actually a really great conversation. But no, I think we did pretty good for kind of talking about what we were thinking we were going to talk about today.
I asked several people, and I'm like, "Oh, we can do this for like 2-3 hours. That's fine, no big deal." And everyone was like, "No, you don't want to just sit there for that long talking live." I'm like, "Okay, fine."
I see a lot of people who do streams that long, and usually it's with a lot more people when you're going through a lot of different stuff. Or I think at a certain point you get maybe to rambling, and believe me, I can ramble. And just like Blair said, I mean, this encompasses such a large part of our life. We can talk about it for a really long time. We can talk. I feel like if I'm not talking about it on this live stream, I'm going to go somewhere and I might talk to someone else. I'll text them or I'll call them or whatever, and I'm still talking about whatever we're going to talk about here. So this is the only difference is I'm dressed a little nicer and I'm on camera. That's about the only difference for me today. The only thing I would add is, I touched on a little earlier, bespoke building. Not everyone can do that. And there's not something that you should be ashamed of or feel bad about. If you don't sew at all, doesn't mean you can't have really nice costumes. You also don't have to spend a whole lot of money, contrary to popular belief. One of the reasons I am wearing this ridiculous suit is it's actually a very close match for one of my newer projects, which is I'm replicating several of the looks from the new James Bond movie coming out in November, I think, at this point, unless it gets moved back again. And this is a film where very little was actually made for the production. A lot of it was sourced, and because of this, you can actually find the real things, but they're very expensive. James Bond wears Tom Ford suits. They're $1,300 minimum, but more $3,000 to $8,000 things. He wears a $10,000 watch, but there's always ways you can find things that look pretty good, really close. And the reason I'm wearing this silly suit is because it cost me, I think, $12 for this jacket, $10 for the shirt, things like that, because I went to thrift stores and I just hunted. And I found stuff that looked close enough. And I found supplemental stuff on Amazon or eBay or Etsy or whatever, I modified, I'll get a 2-button jacket that should be a 3-button. I'll add a buttonhole because my sewing machine happens to do that, and it'll sew a 3rd button on. I'll repress the lapels. There's a lot you can do, and there's a huge difference in the process of a bespoke build versus a sourced build or versus a hybrid build, which is you make some things, you source some things, you modify. Modify is a huge thing that I do. There are some things that I don't have a lot of time to do full bespoke builds. Like I said, Luke is the first bespoke build I've done, I think, in well over a year, because they're very time consuming. So instead I'll maybe commission someone, or I'll go to one of those regular makers, maybe one of the ones overseas, and I'll see what they can send me, and then I'll take what they started, and I'll make it better. I'll fix it up. I have a term that I like to use, is called churching it up, and that's like church clothes. You want to make everything nice and pretty and pristine, right? So when I church something up, I'm making it as nice and pretty as I can from something that might not be crafted from the ground up with the idea of being that end quality, but you can still get there. A lot of things, a lot of inexpensive things you can get can be made better just with weathering, especially Star Wars stuff. You could get a lot of not super nice Star Wars costumes and some paint and fake grease later, and it looks pretty cool. It all depends on what you want to do, where your skill level is, where your budget is, but there's no real barrier aside from your motivation and how much work you want to put in.
It's true. I did a hair tote costume not too long ago, and my friend Brian Helm, who I'm sure you two have acquaintance with online, we got everything in that costume was sourced. and modified because it's a suit, like you said, and black trench coat, leather trench coat. I found that on some random dude selling a German trench coat from, I think, Korea on Etsy that he just happened to pick up from like the 50s. You know, that whole build probably only cost me a decent amount of money because of the trench coat. The trench coat was the only thing in that build that actually cost more than $100. The whole thing beyond that, I know Brian got some of it, so I don't really know all the amount that he put into it, but it was cheap, and then we did things to it, and it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I'll add on to this too. You know, sometimes sourcing things in that manner, regardless, like you said, it can be cheaper than making it from scratch. I mean, for when I'm doing some of like the Isaac stuff that I have behind here, it's like I have a helmet that I 3D modeled and I printed, but I still have to then create bucks for vac forming and buy the PET G for this and do all that. And then I have the gloves that I'm making, which I've sculpted. I then had to mold them. That's silicone, and then they're getting casted in silicone. And silicone is not cheap. You don't want to know what probably my net cost will be at the end of the day for these. Not cheap by any means. And so sometimes going that route and sourcing things can be way cheaper than actually going through the process of making something completely from scratch. So again, you know, there's also that type of thing like budget considerations. If you're going to make something from scratch, know that certain techniques may cost you an arm and a leg at the end of the day. And I'm fine for me. Like for me, I'm using this as a learning process, but it's definitely not been a cheap journey by any means.
Well, at least when you have to charge an arm and a leg, you end up making a few extra.
Yeah.
There's definitely multiple ways to do things, and no way is perfect, and no way is really better than any other. The most important thing you can remember is you get out what you put in, regardless of the road you take. If you don't stay on the road, you're not going to get anywhere. So,
yeah, totally true. All right. Well, thank you too for coming into this. This is the second time I've ever done this in my life. So I'm hoping I'm doing these once a month, and I would love to have, you know, different people back multiple times to talk about stuff, because as you said, we're always talking about this to somebody. We might as well put it live and add more people to the conversation. At least that's the way I look at it anyway.
absolutely.
So yeah, thanks a lot, guys, and till next time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks.